The twin suns of Kethros 9 burned like angry eyes in the orange sky. Below them, the training moon stretched out in every direction. Black volcanic glass covered the ground like a frozen ocean. Sharp edges caught the light and sparkled with cruel beauty. Nothing lived here. Nothing grew. The Coalition had chosen this place for one reason. It was designed to break soldiers. Drill instructor Vorath stood at the edge of the landing zone and watched the transport ships descend. He was Kelvani, a species known throughout the galaxy for their size and strength. His body was covered in black scales that absorbed heat like armor. 3 sets of arms hung at his sides, each one thick with muscle. He had trained soldiers for 600 years. He'd seen thousands of recruits arrive with hope in their eyes. He had watched many of them die. Today's group would be no different. The ships landed and their doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air. 42 recruits stepped down onto the black glass. They came from 31 different species. Some were tall and thin. Others were short and wide. A few floated above the ground on waves of psychic energy. They had all volunteered to fight against the Hollow Swarm, the enemy that was eating its way across the galaxy. The Coalition needed soldiers. These beings had answered the call. Vorath's 4 eyes moved across the group and stopped on one figure. She was small, smaller than any other recruit by at least 2 feet. Her skin was soft and brown, without scales or armor or protective plates. Her body looked fragile, like something that might break if you held it too tight. She was human. The Kelvani felt his lip curl in distaste. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only achieved space travel a few decades ago. When they first applied to join the Coalition, the Council had laughed. Humans lived for less than a century. Most Coalition species measured their lives in thousands of years. What could such brief creatures possibly offer? But the war was going badly. The Hollow Swarm did not care how long you lived. They only cared how you tasted. The Coalition had become desperate enough to accept anyone who could hold a weapon, even mortals. That was what the other species called humans. Mortals. Being so temporary, so quickly gone, that forming bonds with them seemed pointless. Why learn a human's name when they would be dead before you finished your morning meditation? The human female noticed Vorath staring at her. She did not look away. She did not show fear. She simply stared back with eyes that seemed far older than her young face. The drill instructor found this annoying. "Recruits," Vorath called out. His voice echoed across the volcanic plain. "Welcome to Kethros 9. Your training begins now. You will march 40 kilometers across this terrain. You will reach the base on the other side before nightfall. There will be no water provided. There will be no rest. There will be no rescue if you fall. Begin." The recruits looked at each other in confusion. No water? The temperature was already climbing past what most species considered safe. But they had been chosen for this program because they were the best of their worlds. They had survived challenges that killed others. Surely they could survive a simple march. They began to walk. The human fell into step near the middle of the group. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she held the rank of corporal. She had been a soldier on Earth before the Coalition came. She had fought in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. She had survived things that should have killed her many times over. But she had never experienced anything like Kethros 9. The heat hit her like a physical force. Within minutes, her uniform was soaked with sweat. The black volcanic glass beneath her boots radiated warmth that she could feel through the thick solace. Each breath burned her throat. She watched the aliens around her and noticed something strange. They were not sweating. Of course they weren't. Most Coalition species did not regulate temperature through perspiration. Their bodies worked differently. Many of them could survive for weeks without water. Their ancient evolutionary paths had taken them in directions that humans could barely understand. But Elena had studied the briefing documents that the other recruits had ignored. She knew something that worried her deeply. Just because these species could survive without water for weeks under normal conditions did not mean they could survive without water here. The heat of Kethros 9 was not normal. It was extreme. And extreme conditions changed everything. The march continued. At kilometer 10. Elena noticed that the Drenari beside her had begun to stumble. The Drenari were beautiful creatures. Their skin glowed with bioluminescent light, shifting through colors like a living rainbow. They lived for nearly 2,000 years and were known for their wisdom and grace. But this one was losing his glow. His colors were fading to a sick gray. "Are you all right?" Elena asked. The Drenari looked at her with confusion. "I am fine, mortal. Concern yourself with your own survival." At kilometer 15, the Drenari collapsed. He fell without warning, his body hitting the volcanic glass with a sound like breaking dishes. His bioluminescence flickered once, twice, and then went dark. Two other recruits rushed to help him, but Varath's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Leave him. Continue marching. This is training." Elena looked back at the fallen alien. 600 years of life, she thought. 600 years of accumulated wisdom and experience. And he had been brought down by something as simple as water. Or rather, the lack of it. The march continued. More recruits began to fall. At kilometer 20, a Bravosi collapsed. The Bravosi were tactical geniuses with 4 arms and silver skin. They could calculate battle strategies in their heads that would take computers hours to process. This one had been a renowned general before volunteering for the elite forces. At kilometer 23, the Velashi went down. The Velashi were amphibious creatures with gills and webbed hands. Their bodies were designed for water. On this dry, burning moon, they were dying faster than anyone else. Elena counted the fallen. 19 recruits lay scattered across the black glass desert behind them. Nearly half the group. And they still had 17 kilometers to go. The remaining recruits found a large, volcanic rock formation and collapsed in its shadow. They were done. They could not continue. They would wait here for rescue, but Elena knew the rules. Rescue would not come for 18 hours. That was standard coalition protocol. Training exercises were not interrupted, except in cases of complete unit destruction. By the time help arrived, every alien in this group would be dead. She looked at her fellow recruits. Beings from ancient species. Creatures who had lived for centuries. They had traveled between stars and built civilizations that spanned galaxies. And now they lay helpless in the shade, waiting to die. Because they had never needed to learn the one skill that humans had mastered above all others. The skill of refusing to accept death as an answer. Elena Vasquez stood up. She walked out of the shadow and into the burning sun. And she began to dig. Tanix watched the human dig and wondered if the heat had damaged her brain. He was Bravosi, 400 years old, with 4 arms that hung uselessly at his sides. His silver skin had turned an ugly shade of gray. His throat burned with a thirst he had never experienced before. In all his centuries of life, he had never felt so close to death. And yet the tiny human was digging in the dirt like a mad creature. "What is she doing?" croaked Velish, the Velashi whose gills had stopped moving. He lay on his side in the shadow of the rock, his amphibious body slowly shutting down without moisture. "She has lost her mind," said Crix, a young Drenari whose bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing. "The mortals are weak. Their bodies fail quickly. Her thoughts have become confused." Tanix was not so sure. He had studied humans briefly before joining the coalition forces. He knew they came from a harsh world, a planet of deserts and ice ages and constant change. They had evolved not through patience, but through desperation. Every generation faced new challenges. Every century brought new ways to die. And yet they survived. Again and again they survived. The humans' hands were bleeding now. The volcanic rock was sharp, and her soft skin tore easily. But she did not stop. She dug with a focus that seemed almost supernatural. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, searching for something that none of the others could see. Drill instructor Vorath stood nearby, watching. The rules said he could not help the recruits. He could not give them water or shade or advice. But nothing in the rules said he could not observe. And what he observed made him curious. "Mortal," he called out. "What are you doing?" Elena did not look up. Her fingers scraped through ash and dirt and broken rock. "Finding water," she said. Several of the aliens laughed weakly. The sound was more like coughing. "There is no water on Kethros 9, said Tanix. "Our scanners showed nothing. The Coalition chose this moon specifically because it has no surface water." "No surface water," Elena agreed. She continued digging. "That's not the same as no water." Crix made a sound of disgust. "Mortal ignorance. Our scanners are the most advanced in the galaxy. If they say there is no water, there is no water." Elena paused for just a moment. She looked at the Drenari with an expression that Tanix could not read. Then she returned to her digging. "Your scanners look for water the way your species uses water," she said. "Large pools, rivers, lakes, things that sit on the surface waiting to be found. But water doesn't always wait. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes you have to hunt for it." "Hunt for water?" Velish wheezed. "Water does not run away. It does not hide from hunters." Elena smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. "My ancestors lived in deserts," she said. "Real deserts. Places where rain might not fall for years. Places where the sun could kill you in hours. They didn't have scanners or technology or ships that could fly them somewhere better. They had nothing but their bodies and their minds and their absolute refusal to die." She was 2 feet deep now. Her uniform was ruined, covered in ash and blood. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat. She looked like a primitive creature, something that had crawled out of mud in the early days of a young planet. "They learned to find water where others saw only death," Elena continued. "In cactus plants, in morning dew, in the bodies of the creatures they killed, and in rocks." Her fingers touched something different, something that felt wrong in a way that meant everything was right. She began to dig faster. "Volcanic rock is porous," she explained, her voice rising with excitement. "It's full of tiny holes. When there was water on this moon, millions of years ago, some of it seeped into those holes. It got trapped there, locked away, invisible to any scanner looking for liquid water because it's not really liquid anymore. It's more like a sponge that someone forgot to squeeze." She pulled a chunk of rock from the ground. It was darker than the others, heavier, and when she squeezed it with her bleeding hands, moisture appeared on its surface. Water. The aliens stared in silence. Tanix felt something shift inside his chest. 400 years of life. Thousands of hours of tactical training. The best military education the galaxy could provide. And none of it had taught him what this young creature with her 80-year lifespan had known from birth. How to refuse to die. "How?" he managed to ask. "How did you know to look there?" Elena sat back on her heels. She held the wet rock like it was the most precious thing in the universe. Because right now, for everyone in this group, it was. "I didn't know," she admitted. "Not for certain. But when you only have 80 years to live, you learn to take chances. You learn that doing something, anything, is better than sitting still and waiting for death. My ancestors couldn't wait for better conditions. They couldn't hibernate for a century until the drought ended. They had to act now with what they had or they would die. She looked at the aliens around her. Ancient beings. Wise beings. Creatures who had watched stars form and civilizations rise and fall. They had never needed to develop the desperate creativity that came from knowing your time was short. Your species lived for thousands of years, Elena said softly. When things get bad, you wait. You endure. You know that eventually, conditions will improve. Patience is your greatest strength. She began to dig again, pulling more of the moisture-rich rock from the ground. Humans don't have that luxury. We can't wait for things to get better. We have to make them better, right now, with whatever we have available. Patience isn't our strength. Desperation is. Vorath stepped closer. His 4 eyes were fixed on the human with an intensity that made the other recruits nervous. But Elena did not seem to notice or care. The water is in the rock, he said slowly. But the rock is full of volcanic minerals, poisons. If they drink it directly, it will kill them faster than the thirst. Elena nodded. She had already thought of this. Then I'll have to find a way to clean it, she said. Crix laughed bitterly. Clean it? With what? We have nothing. No equipment. No chemicals. No tools. The human looked at him with those strange old eyes. We have everything we need, she said. We have ourselves. Our equipment. Our knowledge. Our will to survive. That's what humans have always had, and it's always been enough. She stood up, bloody and dirty, and more alive than any of them. Take off your armor, she said. Give me your filters. Your jewelry. Anything with parts I can use. I'm going to build something that will save all of our lives. The aliens looked at each other in confusion. This tiny creature, this brief spark of mortality, was giving them orders. The idea seemed absurd, but they were dying. And she was not. One by one, they began to remove their equipment. Elena sat in the shadow of the volcanic rock and stared at the pile of materials in front of her. Pieces of armor, breathing filters, ceremonial jewelry, communication devices, scraps of uniform fabric. It looked like garbage. It looked like nothing that could possibly save 41 lives. But Elena had learned long ago that garbage was just materials waiting for a purpose. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother. The old woman had grown up in a village without electricity or running water. She had taught Elena how to build a water filter from sand and charcoal and an old plastic bottle. You can always find a way, her grandmother had said. Humans always find a way. Elena opened her eyes and got to work. The first problem was obvious. The water in the volcanic rock was full of poison. Minerals that would kill most species quickly and painfully. She needed to remove those minerals. She needed a filter. She picked up the Velashi's breathing apparatus. It was designed to extract oxygen from thin atmospheres, pulling breathable air from almost nothing. The membrane inside was incredibly fine, fine enough to catch particles that were almost too small to see dot. Could it catch mineral particles dissolved in water? She didn't know, but she had to try. Elena tore the breathing apparatus apart. Her fingers moved quickly, separating components, examining each piece. The Velashi watched her with dull eyes. He was too weak to protest, too weak to do anything but hope that this strange human knew what she was doing. The membrane came out in a single piece. It was thin and delicate, like a soap bubble that had somehow learned to hold its shape. Elena held it up to the light and studied its structure. Yes, this might work for the first stage, but she would need more stages. The minerals in the volcanic water were complex. Some were large, some were small. A single filter would not catch them all. She turned to Crix, the Drenari. Your jewelry, she said. The focusing lens. I need it. Crix's hand moved to the crystal that hung around his neck. It had been in his family for 6 generations. His ancestors had used it in religious ceremonies for over 1,000 years. The idea of giving it to this mortal, this temporary creature who would be dead before Crix even reached middle age, felt like a violation of everything sacred. "I cannot," he whispered. Elena met his eyes. There was no anger in her face, no judgment, only understanding. "I know it's precious," she said softly. "I know it means more to you than I can understand. But right now, that crystal is just a thing. Your life is more than a thing. Your memories, your experiences, your future children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who will remember you for 1,000 years. Those matter. The crystal is just a tool." She held out her bleeding hand. "Let me use it as a tool to save you." Crix was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he removed the crystal from his neck and placed it in Elena's palm. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it. The crystal was perfect for what she needed. It could focus light, which meant it could focus other forms of energy as well. She could use it to heat the water, causing some of the minerals to separate and fall to the bottom. Basic distillation. Her grandmother had taught her that too, but she still needed more. She turned to Tanix. The Bravosi was watching her with an expression she could not read. His forearms were wrapped around his body, holding in warmth that was quickly fading as his system shut down. "Your chest plate," Elena said. "It's made of a membrane material, isn't it? Something semi-permeable?" Tanix nodded slowly. The plate was ceremonial armor, designed to honor his ancestors. It was also made from a biological material that allowed some molecules to pass through while blocking others. A living filter created by Bravosi biotechnology. "I know what you're going to ask," Tanix said, "and I will give it to you. But first, tell me something." Elena waited. "How do you know these things?" The Bravosi asked. "How does a species that barely lives a century know so much about survival? About chemistry and biology and engineering? You should not have this knowledge. You have not had time to learn it." Elena smiled sadly as she accepted the chest plate from his hands. "We've had plenty of time," she said. "Just not for each of us individually. Everything I know, I learned from someone who came before me. My grandmother taught me about water filters. My teachers taught me chemistry. Scientists who died centuries ago figured out the principles I'm using now. We don't live long enough to learn everything ourselves. So we pass knowledge down. Each generation adds a little more. Each generation builds on what the last one learned." She began to incorporate the chest plate into her design. "Your species lives for thousands of years. Each of you can learn enormous amounts during a single lifetime. But you don't need to share that knowledge urgently. You don't need to teach your children everything you know before you die, because you'll be around to teach them later. There's no rush." The filter was taking shape now. Multiple stages, each one designed to catch different impurities. It looked ugly. It looked impossible. It looked like something that had been built by a desperate creature with nothing to lose, which is exactly what it was. "Humans are always in a rush," Elena continued. "We're always racing against death. So we write everything down. We teach our children as soon as they can understand. We build libraries and schools and networks that preserve knowledge across generations. A human scientist dies, but her discoveries live forever. A human engineer dies, but his designs are still used 1,000 years later." She held up the completed filter. It was a strange object, a combination of alien technology and human ingenuity. 3 separate stages, connected by strips of torn uniform fabric. The Valashi membrane at the top. The Bravosi biological plate in the middle. The Drinari crystal at the bottom, ready to heat and purify whatever made it through. "We call it standing on the shoulders of giants," Elena said. Every human who ever lived contributed something to the humans who came after. We don't have time to be selfish with our knowledge. If we were, we would have gone extinct long ago. She looked at the dying aliens around her. Ancient beings who had never needed to develop this kind of desperate cooperation, who had never needed to race against time, passing precious information from one generation to the next like runners in a relay. Now, Elena said, picking up a chunk of wet volcanic rock, let's see if this works. She squeezed the rock over the filter. Dirty, poisonous water dripped through the first membrane. It changed color as it passed through the biological plate. The crystal at the bottom began to glow as it heated the liquid, separating out the heaviest impurities. What emerged at the other end was clear, clean, safe. Elena caught a few drops in her palm and looked at them for a long moment. Then she carried them to the Velashi, who was closest to death. "Open your mouth," she said. The amphibian's eyes focused on her with difficulty. He was beyond words now, beyond understanding much of anything. But some instinct made him obey. Elena let the water fall between his cracked lips. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the Velashi's gills twitched. Once, twice. They began to move in a weak but steady rhythm. "More," he gasped. "Please." Elena was already moving back to the filter. "Everyone stay calm," she said. "I'll get to each of you. But I need you to be patient. This takes time." Tanix watched the human work and felt tears forming in his eyes. He had not cried in 200 years. Bravosi were not emotional creatures. But watching this brief, fragile, moral creature fight to save beings who had dismissed her species as insignificant moved something deep inside him. "She's going to save us," he whispered. "A creature with 80 years of life is going to save people who will live for millennia." Beside him, Crix nodded slowly. His hand moved to his chest, where his family's crystal had hung for generations. "Perhaps," the Draenari said quietly, "we have been measuring the wrong things." The twin suns reached their highest point in the sky, and Elena Vasquez did not stop working. Her hands had stopped bleeding hours ago. The blood had dried into a dark crust that cracked every time she moved her fingers. The pain was a distant thing now, something that happened to a body she barely remembered owning. All that mattered was the water. All that mattered was keeping these aliens alive. The filter worked, but it worked slowly. Each batch of clean water took nearly 20 minutes to produce. Each batch provided enough for one alien to receive a life-saving drink. With 41 aliens to save, and only a few hours before the weakest ones died, Elena was racing against time in a way that no one from a long-lived species could truly understand. This was what humans did. This was what they had always done. "Drink slowly," she told Velish, the Velashi, as she poured water into his mouth for the third time. His gills were moving properly now. The gray color was fading from his skin. He would live. "Why?" he asked weakly. "Why are you helping me? I called you inferior. I said your species was worthless. I laughed at your short lives." Elena moved to the next alien, a Draenari female whose light had almost completely faded. "I know," she said simply. "Then why?" Elena paused. The question deserved an answer, even though she did not have time for conversation. Even though every second she spent talking was a second she was not filtering water. "Because you were wrong," she said. "And the best way to prove someone wrong is not with arguments. It's with actions. I could spend the rest of my short life trying to convince you that humans are valuable. Or I could save your life and let you figure it out yourself." She poured water into the Draenari female's mouth. The alien's bioluminescence flickered, then slowly began to brighten. "Besides," Elena added, "we're all soldiers now. We're all fighting the same enemy. The hollow swarm doesn't care how long you live or what planet you come from. They just want to consume everything. If we're going to beat them, we need every single person in this group, even the ones who think they're better than me." She smiled, and there was no bitterness in it, only truth. Drill instructor Vorath had been watching from a distance for hours. The rules said he could not interfere with training exercises. The rules said recruits must succeed or fail on their own merits. But nowhere in the rules did it say he could not learn from what he observed. And he was learning more in this single day than he had learned in the previous century. The human female was exhausted. He could see it in the way she moved, the way her shoulders slumped between batches of water. She was pushing her body past its limits, operating on nothing but will and determination. Any other species would have collapsed by now. Any other species would have given up, accepted that some of the recruits would die, focused on saving only the ones who were closest to survival. But Elena Vasquez refused to choose. She moved from alien to alien, giving each one exactly as much water as they needed to stay alive. Not enough to make them comfortable. Not enough to make them strong. Just enough to keep death at bay for a little longer. She was rationing with mathematical precision, calculating each species' needs based on information she had memorized from briefing documents. Documents that the other recruits had ignored, because they thought the information was irrelevant. Varth thought about the Kelvani approach to training. His species believed in strength. They believed that survival meant being bigger, tougher, more powerful than the obstacles in your path. They had conquered their home world through force and spread across the galaxy through military might. But this human was not using strength. She was using something else entirely, something that the Kelvani had no word for because they had never needed to develop it. She was using care. "Instructor," Tanix called out weakly. The Bravosi was stronger now, strong enough to speak in full sentences. "May I ask you something?" Vorath turned his 4 eyes toward the alien. "Ask? Have you ever seen anything like this? In all your centuries of training soldiers?" The Kelvani was silent for a long moment. His scales shifted colors slightly, a sign of deep thought. "No," he finally admitted. "I have seen acts of physical courage. I have seen soldiers lift impossible weights, run impossible distances, fight impossible enemies. I have seen psychic beings bend reality with their minds. I have seen engineers build weapons that could destroy planets." He paused, watching Elena squeeze another batch of water through the filter. "But I have never seen someone work so hard to save people who treated them with contempt. I have never seen someone refuse to give up when every logical calculation said giving up was the correct choice. I have never seen someone treat 41 strangers as if each one was the most important being in the universe." Tanix nodded slowly. "My people have a word for it. An old word from before we achieved space travel. Before we met other species. We called it heart. We thought it was a weakness, something that evolution had removed from our psychology because it was inefficient. And now?" The Bravosi looked at the human female. Elena was holding a dying Kelvani's head in her lap, pouring water into his mouth while whispering words of encouragement. The Kelvani was 3 times her size. His species had mocked humans as mortals for decades. And yet she cared for him as if he were her own child. "Now I think we were wrong," Tanix said. "I think heart is not a weakness at all. I think it might be the strongest thing in the universe." The hours passed. Elena did not rest. When her legs gave out, she crawled. When her arms became too weak to squeeze the rocks, she used her body weight. When her vision blurred from exhaustion, she closed her eyes and worked by touch alone. She had passed the point of physical endurance hours ago. What kept her moving now was something deeper. something that her species had developed over millions of years of refusing to accept death. Call it stubbornness. Call it determination. Call it the desperate fury of creatures who knew their time was limited and chose to fight anyway. By the time the suns began to set, all 41 aliens had received water. All 41 were alive. Elena had saved every single one. She sat back against the volcanic rock and closed her eyes. Her body was finished. She had given everything she had. The last batch of water she had produced, she had given to a Calvani private who had called her mortal. With disgust in his voice, that morning, she had not kept any for herself. Human, Tannic said urgently. You need to drink. You need water more than any of us. Elena smiled without opening her eyes. The filter is empty, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. There wasn't enough moisture in the rocks for another batch. Someone has to go without. Then one of us should go without. Not you. You saved all of us. You're all soldiers, Elena murmured. You're all needed for the war. One human more or less won't make a difference. Tannic stared at her in disbelief. Even now, at the end of her strength, she was thinking about others. Even now, she was making calculations that put the mission ahead of herself. This was what humans were. This was what they had always been. Vorath stepped forward. In his hands, he held a container. It was his personal water supply, the one that drill instructors were allowed to carry, but forbidden to share with recruits. The rule said he could not help them during the exercise, but the exercise was over. The human had won. Drink, he said, pressing the container to Elena's lips. She was too weak to protest. The water flowed into her mouth, and she swallowed automatically. Once, twice, 3 times. Her eyes opened. She looked up at the massive Calvani and saw something in his 4 eyes that she had never expected to see. Respect. You have passed the test, Vorath said quietly. All of you. This training exercise was designed to see how recruits responded to extreme conditions. Most groups lose at least 30%. Some lose more than half. He looked around at the 42 living beings. 42 soldiers who would fight against the Hollow Swarm. 42 survivors who had learned something today that they would never forget. You lost no one, Vorath continued. And it was because of her. He pointed at Elena with one of his 3 right arms. Remember this, recruits. Remember what a mortal taught you today. Remember that strength is not always about muscles or weapons or ships. Sometimes the strongest thing in the universe is simply refusing to let someone die. Elena closed her eyes again. She was too tired to respond. But somewhere deep inside her exhausted mind, she felt a spark of pride. She was human. And today, that had been enough. The rescue ships arrived 18 hours after the march began, exactly on schedule. They descended through the orange sky of Kethra's 9 with their lights flashing and their engines humming. The medical teams inside were prepared for casualties. They always were after a training exercise on this moon. They were not prepared for what they found. 42 recruits. All alive. All stable enough to walk to the ships on their own power. Or with the help of their fellow soldiers. The lead medic, a Calvani female with centuries of experience, stood at the base of her ship and watched in disbelief. She had been doing this job for 400 years. She had never seen a full company survive the Kethros the 9th of March. How? She asked drill instructor Vorath. This is impossible. Vorath pointed to a stretcher being loaded into the medical bay. On it lay a small figure, a human female, unconscious and covered in dried blood and ash. Her vital signs were weak but stable. She would live. Ask her when she wakes up, Vorath said. She's the one who made it possible. The journey back to the main base took 3 hours. Elena slept through all of it. Her body had finally given up, demanding the rest that she had denied it for far too long. The medical systems worked to restore her hydration levels, repair her damaged hands, and treat the exhaustion that had pushed her almost to the point of death. But while she slept, the other recruits talked. Tanik sat with Crix and Velish and the others, and they told the medical staff what had happened. They described how the human had dug for water when everyone else had given up, how she had built a filter from scraps and garbage, how she had worked for hours without rest, saving every single life, refusing to let anyone die. The stories spread quickly. By the time the ships landed at the main base, half the station had heard about what happened on Kethros 9. By the time Elena woke up, she was famous. She opened her eyes to find 41 aliens staring at her. "What?" she croaked. Her throat was still dry, her voice still weak. Tanik stepped forward. In his hands, he held something that Elena recognized. It was the makeshift canteen she had built from an equipment pouch during the march. Someone had cleaned it and filled it with fresh water. "Drink, mortal," the Bravosi said. And for the first time, the word did not sound like an insult. It sounded like a title, like a name that meant something important. Elena took the canteen and drank. The water was cold and clean and perfect. She had never tasted anything so good in her entire life. "How long was I out?" she asked. 14 hours, Crix said. The Drenari was glowing brightly again, his bioluminescence restored to full health. "The doctor said you pushed yourself beyond safe limits. They said most species would have died doing what you did." Elena shrugged. "Most species don't have to." She tried to sit up and found that her body did not want to cooperate. Strong hands helped her, 4 of them, as Tanik lifted her gently into a sitting position. "We have been talking," the Bravosi said. "All of us, about what you did, about what it means." Elena looked at the faces around her. Ancient faces, wise faces, faces that had seen things she could not imagine and would live to see things she never would. But in all of those faces, she saw something new, something that had not been there before the march. They were looking at her as an equal. "We were wrong about humans," Velish said. The Velashi's gills moved in a pattern that Elena had learned meant deep emotion. "We thought your short lives made you inferior. We thought your fragile bodies made you weak. We thought you had nothing to offer the Coalition except numbers." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "We were fools," he finally said. Crix stepped forward and held out his hand. In his palm lay the focusing crystal that Elena had used to build the filter. His family's treasure, his ancestors' sacred object. "Take it," he said. "It belongs to you now." Elena shook her head. "I can't. It's your heritage. Your family has had it for generations. And now you are family," Crix replied simply. "You saved my life. In Drenari culture, that creates a bond that transcends blood. The crystal belongs to whoever deserves it most. And after what you did, that is you." Elena looked at the crystal for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. The weight of it in her hand felt like more than just stone. It felt like acceptance, like belonging. "Thank you," she whispered. Drill instructor Vorath entered the medical bay. His massive form blocked the light from the doorway, casting a shadow across the room. But his expression was not threatening. If anything, it was thoughtful. "Recruits," he said. "I have just finished my report to Coalition Command. I have recommended something that has never been suggested in the military's 10,000-year history." The aliens looked at him with curiosity. Elena felt a strange sense of worry. Had she done something wrong? Would she be punished for breaking protocol somehow? "I have recommended that human survival training become mandatory for all Coalition species," Vorath continued. "Every soldier who joins our forces will learn what humans learn. They will be taught to find water where there is none, to build tools from nothing, to refuse death even when death seems certain. He looked directly at Elena. They will be taught to have heart, he said. The word was awkward in his mouth, unfamiliar. But he said it with respect. Elena did not know what to say. She had not done anything special, not from her perspective. She had simply done what any human would have done, what her grandmother would have done, what her ancestors had done for millions of years. She had refused to give up. There's something else, Varth said. Coalition Command has asked me to deliver a message directly to you, Corporal Vasquez. He held out a small device. Elena took it with trembling hands and activated it. A holographic image appeared, showing a figure that she recognized from the news. The Supreme Commander of Coalition Forces, the highest military authority in the galaxy. Corporal Elena Vasquez, the recording said. On behalf of the Coalition and all the species we represent, I thank you for what you did on Kethros 9. Your actions saved 41 lives. Your example has taught us something that we badly needed to learn. The holographic figure paused, as if considering its next words carefully. We called your species mortals because we thought your short lives made you less than us. We were wrong. Your mortality does not make you weak. It makes you urgent. It makes you creative. It makes you care about every single life in a way that we, with our long centuries of existence, had forgotten how to care. The figure leaned forward, and Elena saw something in its ancient eyes that surprised her. Humility. You have taught us that the measure of a species is not how long they live, but how hard they fight to keep living, how much they give to protect others, how brightly they burn in the brief time they have. The recording flickered. The Hollow Swarm is coming for all of us. They do not care about our differences. They only want to consume. And when they arrive, we will need every advantage we can find. Today, you showed us that humanity might be the greatest advantage of all. The hologram faded. Elena sat in silence, holding the device in her hands. Around her, the aliens who had once dismissed her species as insignificant stood with their heads bowed in respect. 41 beings who would live for centuries or millennia, showing honor to a creature who would be lucky to see 90 years. Tanix broke the silence. Welcome to the Coalition, Corporal Vasquez, he said. Truly welcome this time. We are honored to fight beside you. Elena looked at him. She looked at all of them. These strange, ancient, powerful beings who had learned something today that they would carry with them for the rest of their very long lives. Then she smiled. Just call me Elena, she said. And don't worry. Whatever comes next, whatever the Hollow Swarm throws at us, we'll face it together. That's what humans do. We survive. And we bring everyone we can with us. She held up the canteen that Tanix had given her, the one she had built from scraps during the darkest hour on Kethros 9. Now, she said, who's going to show me where I can get some real food? Saving 41 lives really works up an appetite. The medical bay filled with laughter. The sound was strange, coming from so many different species. But somehow, it worked. Somehow, it sounded right outside the window. The stars stretched out in every direction. Somewhere among them, the Hollow Swarm was preparing to consume another world. Somewhere, more beings were dying. But here, in this moment, 42 soldiers from 32 species sat together and laughed. And that was something worth fighting for. That was something worth surviving for. Elena Vasquez took another drink of water and felt, for the first time since leaving Earth, like she truly belonged. The universe was vast and cold and full of dangers. But humans had been facing vast and cold and dangerous things since they first learned to walk upright. They had faced ice ages and predators and diseases and wars. They had faced everything the universe could throw at them, and they had refused to die. Now, With the greatest threat of all approaching, humanity would teach the galaxy what that refusal really meant. Not just for themselves, but for everyone. Because that's what humans did. They survived, and they brought everyone they could with them.